I'm sitting in hot and sunny Texas today. Like a lot of you, I guess I'm wondering when the Canadian and provincial ministries of transportation are going to wake up and realize what a tragically stupid mistake unloading cheap immigrant labor on our trucking industry has been. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a push in Canada to bring in immigrant truck drivers. A company that I worked for out of Saskatoon back in those days brought in a few dozen from Scotland, England, Poland, and Ukraine. These were all current drivers in their own countries. They were experienced drivers in their own countries. And they came over to Canada to work and be employed. All of them spoke fluent English. Some of them stayed, some of them didn't. I got to know a few of the guys pretty good. Some of them went home. Every one of them said the reason they were going home was they just could not adjust to the distance, open space and distance that we have to travel in North America. They just could not adjust to that. The driving part, they were fine. It was the space that they had trouble with, but some of them did stay. I understand that our demographics are shrinking. Guys like me are getting old and retiring. Our kids don't want to do the job. Can't really say as I blame them. I don't think we've ever really had a driver shortage. I think all we have is a pay shortage. If this job paid like it used to, when we could actually make a decent living at it, we might be able to attract more people to the industry. But it doesn't. Rates have been cut down to nothing. We've got all of these little fly-by-night companies coming in. They cut the rates, they pay their drivers shit wages. They're not experienced. They buy older trucks, not newer ones. They're 20 years old with the fenders flapping off of them as they're going down the road. Someone in our government decided that to increase our population, we would bring in, I don't know, a couple million, I suppose, people from India, places like that, which is fine. I really don't have a problem with that. They unloaded them into the trucking industry though, because we've got this great big driver shortage that they're worried about. We'll just make them be truck drivers. Simple enough, right? It's an easy job. Any dummy can do it. That's where we'll put them. And they're willing to work. I will say that for them. They wanted to come over here and work, and they will work, and they work hard. Problem is, none of them had any experience whatsoever. The guys that we brought over back in the 90s and 2000s, they were already established, experienced truck drivers. These guys are not, and they're not getting trained. The evidence of this inexperience and poor training are all over our highways. 401 is a nightmare every day. I can't get up and down that highway once without seeing one or two flipped over in the ditch. It's been getting progressively worse over the last probably 15 years as more and more of them have come over and found their way into the trucking industry. And then Humboldt happened. And I don't know if that didn't wake up our government that there's a problem in our industry. I don't know what will. Government says, oh, well, we've done lots. We brought in MELT, mandatory entry-level training, which doesn't look a whole lot different than what the standard was before. They get a total of 122 hours of training, half of which, more than half of which, is in a classroom. They get 55 hours of in-cab training. Well, for most of us that have been out here for a while, that's less than a week's work. So they sit in the classroom for a couple of weeks, they go out in the truck for a couple of weeks, or the equivalent of a week's work, and suddenly they're qualified to pull any combination of truck and trailer at any weight, with the exception of LCV, long combination vehicle. That's a separate endorsement. Aside from that, they come out of those schools with a couple of weeks, under their belt, and they're sent down the highway. With the MELT program, the government introduced incentives for drivers to learn how to drive a truck. I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars went into that, but the schools were subsidized. Didn't take very long for a certain population to figure out how to fraud that. Open up all of these Cracker Jack schools, issuing Cracker Jack driver's licenses, send these drivers out to their own Cracker Jack companies, and send them down the highway. Well, I've been told that the government is trying to crack down on these schools, and they've closed some schools, and they're forcing drivers to retest that came out of those schools. And I guess that's a step in the right direction. But how did we get here in the first place? How was this allowed to happen in the first place? Somebody pretty seriously dropped the ball. Our kids, in Ontario at least, have to go through a graduated driving program to get a license to drive a car. They have a G1, a G2, and a G license. There's 3 stages for kids to drive a car. There is nothing like this for the commercial drivers, and there should be. We need some kind of a graduated program. They start with a DZ for a year, go up to an AZ, they work in the city, they do little pedal runs. They need to get experience behind them before we give them a load of auto parts and send them to Texas. I really hope that it's not too late to put Pandora in the box when it comes to this stuff that's going on with our industry. I don't know. I hope it's not too late. I don't even fault the guys that are, coming over here and want to work. It's kind of admirable in a way. At least they're not coming over and going on welfare. They want to work. They're willing to work. What they're not willing to do is learn how to do the job right. They don't worry about safety. They don't worry about the regulations that have been put in place. I know nobody likes speed limiters, but it's a law. Only reputable carriers are following that law in order to protect the reputations that they have. The disreputable carriers don't care. I get my doors blown off all the time and there's no enforcement. Asked an enforcement officer one time, why is there no enforcement? They don't have the resources and they don't have the manpower. Well, there's something else that needs to change right there. Federal government spends how much money all over the world trying to help everybody else out? How about putting a little into our ministries and staffing them and funding them so that we can get some enforcement in our industry? I get some of what I'm saying might not be that popular, but maybe I'm just old. You can't legislate common sense. It doesn't matter what laws you put on the books if nobody follows them. You just can't. You can't legislate common sense. It doesn't work. It has to start at the bottom. It has to start in the schools, teaching the guys. We used to have mentorship. When I started, sure, I got my license. It didn't take me very long to get it, but I couldn't get a job. I drove circles in a gravel pit for a summer stockpiling rock. Went to work for Coca-Cola, delivering to the city grocery stores. Did city deliveries for Consolidated Fast Freight. Did pedal runs to Regina. Eventually got to the 3 provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. I did that. It was a couple, 3 years before I went anywhere and crossed the border or anything like that. Now they come out of the school, they're handed a set of keys, and away they go. How is that right? How can nobody see the problem with that? Consumers are so hung up on having cheap goods. They don't want the price of anything to go up. Nobody likes inflation. Neither do I. What's it costing us? Where's the first place that gets cut? Transportation always is the first one to get cut. The rates get cut. The driver's wages may or may not get cut, but they sure as heck don't go up. A driver today working 60 hours a week should be making $120,000 a year, not 60. I don't know what we're going to do, but it's something's got to change. So ask yourself this question. 10 cents or more for a loaf of bread could have saved those 16 kids in Humboldt. Would you pay it? If that 10 cents meant that we had better schools, better training, better drivers, better funding and staffing for our enforcement agencies, I'd pay it.